Matthew chapter 20, verses 17 to 19. Jesus predicts his death and resurrection. The word that we are going to feature in this section is number 3860, to deliver up. And again, we have the particles highlighted. Don't believe there's any new ones in this short section. It begins in verse 17, Ke anaveinon o Isus is Jerusalema, parelave tus dodicus mathitas kat idion in Teotho. And Jesus, ascending unto Jerusalem, took with himself the 12 disciples. And underlined red means that there is a section that features this word. And so Jesus now is heading south to Jerusalem with his full 12 disciples. But doing it, it says in private on the way, not letting anybody know, I suppose is what it means. Ke ipan aptis, and he said to them. Now going to Jerusalem, one thing I thought was interesting is that the city of Jerusalem is not mentioned in the book of Revelation as such. The word Jerusalem for the city of Jerusalem. New Jerusalem, yes, but not the Jerusalem that we know as the capital of Israel. So he's taken them, and he said to them in verse 18, Idhu, behold, anavenomen is Jerusalema, we ascend unto Jerusalem. And the Son of Man, ke o eos tu anthropu, paradothisate tis archiarevsi, ke grammatevsi, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to the chief priests and to the scribes, ke katakrinusin avton thanato, and they will condemn him to death. Delivering up is our word that we're featuring, 3860. It says in Genesis 14:20, first place this is mentioned, it says, and blessed be God the highest, who delivered up your enemies under your hands to you. And that was Melchizedek saying that Abraham. And then in Matthew 4:12, it says, and Jesus, having heard that John was delivered up, he withdrew into Galilee. Now, many places this word delivered up has a negative connotation, but not all the time. Matthew 10:4 says, and Judas Iscariot, the one also having delivered him up. Another delivering up. Matthew 10:21, and brother shall deliver up brother unto death, Jesus warns. Matthew 24:9, and they shall deliver you unto affliction, or deliver you up unto affliction, and shall kill you. In Matthew 27:2, and having bound him, they took and delivered him up to Pontius Pilate, the governor. So the Jews delivered Jesus to the Romans. Luke 10:22, all things were delivered up to me by my Father. See, now there's a positive place. John 19:11, Jesus says to Pilate, you have not an authority in anything against me except what was given to you from above. Now on account of this, the one delivering me up to you has the greater sin. Now, he's either the one delivering up would either be God or the Jews. Now, God doesn't have sin, so it has to be the Jews, the chief priests and the scribes, not all the Jews, of course. Now, the Jews don't want to acknowledge Jesus Christ as God, but yet we find them defending themselves for putting Jesus to death, which is, to me, sort of interesting, because if you're saying this man doesn't exist, he's not who he says he is, it's a fake and all this, then why would they be trying to defend themselves for the accusations that Jesus was put to death by the Jews? You wouldn't think they would care, because they don't. they're saying that he's nobody and nothing, so why would they even care? But yet they're trying to defend themselves. I think that's sort of interesting. A certain thing popped up in the news today as I was going into the Jerusalem Post. And as I mentioned before, I have this mosaic, which I believe could have been first century, second century mosaic that was put in through a Roman camp outside of the Megiddo prison up in Galilee. And here this mosaic, it says, proscenic and dedicated by a Keptus, a woman, because it says Filiotheos, a friend of God, the Tropazon, to Theo, to God, Jesus Christ, Theo, Isu Christo. And this is the earliest church in existence that we know of, and it says to God, Jesus Christ. Now, people, many of them have not believed that Jesus is God. If you were to show them this throughout the last 2,000 years, what would they have said? Well, the earliest people, the earliest church we find had this inscription. But so now what is Israel going to do? What did I see today? They're digging it up. I was almost having a heart attack over this. They're digging it up and sending it to the United States, to some evangelical college. Well, maybe it'd be better here than it would be in Israel. I don't know. But to me, it just shows the disdain that the Jews have for the Christians. And it just doesn't help me with my feelings towards Israel at all when I see the things that they do, let alone the war going on now between the Muslims and the Jews. I figure they both deserve each other. And so I just wanted to show you that as a little side note. And so the chief priests is mentioned only in the Gospels, the book of Acts, and Hebrews, number 749. Here, chief priests. And then the scribes, 11:22, right here, the grammatevsi, chief priests and the scribes. It says in Matthew 26:57, and the one seizing Jesus took him away to Caiaphas, the chief priest, where the scribes and the elders were gathered together. So exactly as Jesus says, he's going to be delivered up to the chief priests and the scribes. And then in Matthew 14:53, and they took Jesus to the chief priest, and all the chief priests together to him, and the elders and the scribes. And then in John 18:13 it says, and they took him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was chief priest that year. In John 18:24, and Annas, the chief priest, and Caiaphas, and John and Alexander, as many as were of the family of the chief priest. So all of these people. Now they're all going to disappear in 35 years. Jerusalem will be destroyed by the Roman armies. Now going down to verse 19, Jesus finishes and says, Ke paradososin, they'll deliver him up, avton tis ethnosin, is to empekse, ke mastigose, ke stavrose, ke titriti imera anastisate. And they will deliver him up to the ethnosin, the nations. We get the word ethnic, comes from that. To mock him, to whip him, to crucify him. And the third day he will rise up. Now, the nations, we see a first mention of nations in the Greek Bible, Genesis 10:5. It says, from out of these were separated islands of the ethnosin, the nations in their land, each according to tongue, among their tribes and among their nations. And this was generations from Noah. Earlier, I believe, we had the Tower of Babel, where the languages were confused. In Genesis 17:4-5, it says, and behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be father of a multitude of nations, and kings will come forth from you. And that was Abraham, and we are children of Abraham, the Christians, not Jews, unless you are a Jew. Exodus 19:5, it says, "And now, if in hearing you should hear my voice and guard my covenant, you will be to me a prized people from all of the nations." So the Jews were chosen, though, by God. But then in Hosea 8:8, it says Israel was swallowed down. Now it became among the nations as a useless item. Is it any better today? I would question. I don't think it is. It's pretty useless. I mean, yesterday they just had 50,000 people with the Pride people going through Jerusalem and parading their sin. So Israel and what the things they're doing is really, to me, it's under anathema, under a curse by God, I believe. It says that in the Bible, anathema. In Luke 14:29, as far as 1702, Paikse, to mock, it says that lest at any time, having set its foundation and not being able to complete it, all the ones viewing should begin to mock him. Jesus uses that in his parable of the man building his house on the sand, not being able to complete it. I think it's that, maybe it's another parable, but the idea of is not completing it, the house. And then mastigosin, to whip him. It says in Matthew 10:17, "And take heed of the men, for they shall deliver you unto Sanhedrins, and in their synagogues they will whip you," the early Christians. In Matthew 23:34, it says, "On account of this, behold, I send to you prophets, and of them you will whip." So the prophets were whipped by the Jews. And then crucify, 47:17. It says the first mention of the crucifixion is not here. It's in Esther 7:9, where Haman was going to have the Jews killed, but then his plot was found out by Artaxerxes through Esther, and then the eunuch of Artaxerxes, Harbona, mentioned to the king that Haman had set up a tree 50 cubits high, which might have been more than a tree, a timber. And what does it say in Esther 7:9? "And the king said, let him be crucified upon it." Stavros, stavrose, to be crucified upon it. That's the first place in the Bible, Greek Bible, we have that. Probably doesn't have that in the King James. And then it says, "And in the third day he will rise up." So Jesus is telling the disciples he's going to die and he's going to rise up. But what does it say in Matthew 27:62-66? It says, "Now the next day, which is after the preparation, were gathered together the chief priests and the Pharisees to Pilate, saying, Kyrie, O Master, we remember that deluded one said while still living, after 3 days I arise. Bid then to safeguard the tomb until the 3rd day." So the Jews believed that he was going to rise, or he said he was going to arise. And then it says, "Lest at any time his disciples coming at night should steal it, and should say to the people, He has risen from the dead ones, and will be the last delusion worse than the first." And Pilate said to them, "You have a custodian, a custodial guard. Ipagate, go away. Asphalisas os idate. You safeguard as you know." So the custodial guard of the Jews went to the tomb. It wasn't the Romans, as you're led to believe by so many people. Now, what did the disciples think? It says in John 20, verse 9, "For not yet they knew the scripture that it is necessary for him to rise up from the dead." And this was after his death, when Peter and John went to the sepulchre. And they didn't know, none of them understood this rising from the dead. Now, the rising from the dead is what it's all about for me and the Christians, you. If he didn't rise from the dead, wasn't raised from the dead and stayed in the tomb, it would not be a story. But he did rise from the dead. Many people saw him. He appeared after the resurrection to many people. The great earthquake took place. The veil of the temple, which is like 6 or 7 inches thick, was ripped from the top all the way to the bottom. And the dead came out of the tombs and were walking around in Jerusalem. So we, the believers that Jesus rose from the dead, and our belief in that will fulfill the Father's demand for punishment for sin. And our sin will have been forgiven because of our believing that Jesus rose from the dead. This is what it's basically all about. The disciples went out afterwards and did proclaim the resurrection of the dead. Paul proclaimed the resurrection of the dead. This is what most of the Bible is all about, is the resurrection of the dead, our sanctification, separation from sin, and the forgiveness of sins, loving our family, our neighbors as ourselves. The wonderful things of Christianity. Now you can compare that to what's going on into the world with Israel and the Muslims all around them and their battle. And to me, I'll take Jesus Christ. Our next section, the mothers of the sons of Zebedee.